the front door goes. And I think,
here he is.
I've registered that it's uniformed police officers at my door. And I think that is the point in my life where everything changed. They came in and they said, we're terribly sorry, but Ben didn't resurface after the dive today. He was the one that said to me, it's a recovery mission, not a rescue mission. And those words cemented my fate. 6 o'clock the next morning, I said the words that no parent ever wants to say. I'm so sorry, my darlings, but Daddy has died. At a time when all I wanted to do was grieve my husband, I had to be thinking about money. The love and the loss and the pain, it's never going to disappear, but you will grow a life around it.
Today's episode is with the magnificent Rosie Moss. She is founder of Widowed AF, an award-winning podcast host, and today's conversation is all about grief and how she lost her husband Ben. It's honest, it's raw, and we really hope it helps many people going through grief at the moment. Rosie, hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me, Jess.
Well, thank you for coming on. And I actually want to just start off by saying huge congrats for winning gold in the interview category at the British Podcast Awards recently. I mean, that's huge.
Thank you, and thank you for mentioning it. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was probably as much of a surprise to me as it was to everybody else in the room that evening. But yeah, it was incredible.
And we'll talk more about that later in this conversation. But you beat some huge podcasts and names. And Louis Theroux. We love him, but us women often don't speak about our awards and accolades enough. So I just want to, that's incredible.
Thank you.
Testament to everything you do. And you do really help people deal with death.
Yeah.
And before we go into the work you've been doing over the last, 8-9 years, I want to take you back so that you can take us back to the beginning, before you became an expert on this subject of being a widow. And I'd love you to tell me about Ben and how you met him.
Any opportunity to speak about my late husband, Jess, so thank you. So I was at university, I was studying journalism in London, and I answered an advert for a receptionist in a flooring company. And I went to this interview, which was in a port. It wasn't actually London as advertised, it was kind of Barking. And I walked into this, essentially a porter cabin for this interview. And as I walked in, this man walked past me. And it was that real cartoon, head swivel. And we both did it. We both caught each other's eye. And we didn't see each other again. He actually left the business and went to set up his own in France. But I kind of, thought about him sometimes. And it was a work Christmas party, and he'd come over from France to see his old workmates. And we, there was a little bit of flirtation going on. And then another mutual friend's 40th and a few glasses of wine and a bit of a drunken snog outside the pub. And, the rest is history.
And what year was that in?
That would be around 2006.
Okay, so 20 years ago now we're talking. And how long after that did you get married and, move to the next level, shall we say?
Well, he was still living in France at the time. So sounds really lovely and romantic. I used to fly from Luton Airport out to France.
I mean, that doesn't sound that romantic.
That's not so romantic, no. And he had this little house that he'd renovated in France. And I'd go over there and we'd just kind of spend these lost weekends. It was out in the middle of nowhere. We'd get wine in, have the fire going. It was just really kind of sweet, romantic. It was just lovely. And then basically we realised we didn't want to be apart. So he closed down his business. He actually went back to work for the employer where we'd met. I'd finished my degree, so we rented somewhere in London above a Chinese in Blackheath. It was probably the best time of my life. You finally got a full-time job, you got a bit of disposable income, and we just had so much fun. So we married in 2008, very, very intimate ceremony. It was a registry office and then a family meal. And again, it just was a really, really happy time. There's, of course, it wasn't perfect. No marriage is perfect, but we got each other on a level that I've never really known with anybody else. We just worked together.
And so you married in 2008 and then you then had a baby?
We did in 2010. We had our first baby. So we moved out of London when I was pregnant.
Yeah.
Moved out to the Kent coast. And we welcomed our first baby in April 2010. And we were very lucky with our first. We had a very easy baby. So again, we built this life together. We met other couples with children. We were in and out of people's houses. We were just having a great time. I didn't go back to work after maternity leave. They offered voluntary redundancies, and I planned to go back to work. I was quite career driven.
What were you working as?
I was working in PR, actually. I was working at the time for central government. And then this baby arrived, and I don't know, some sort of maternal urge took over, and I wanted to be a stay-at-home mum. So we made it work. We didn't have money for holidays and cars and that sort of thing, but we had a home and we had a lot of love.
What was he like as a dad?
Incredible.
Was he?
Incredible. Yeah, he really was. He was very, very hands-on, very tactile with the children. My dad pointed out to me, when you look at pictures of Ben with the kids, he's always holding them, or he's got a hand on the shoulder, or he's bringing them in for a big squeeze. And I think a lot of dads, they're not as tactile. Mums tend to do a lot of the cuddling and, the sharing of the bed and that sort of thing, whereas he was really, really good at that stuff. He was quite outdoorsy as well, so he brought to the family something that I perhaps wasn't as au fait with.
Well, any marriage is about, a bit of yin and yang.
Yin and yang, exactly.
Yeah, bringing it together. Can you talk us through the days leading up to Ben's accident?
We went on to have 2 more children.
Yes.
So we had Hector in 2012, and then we had Tabitha in 2017. I can remember thinking to myself, I don't know how I've done this, but I've created a perfect life. Because when you roll the dice and you have a child, there's always a risk, isn't there? And I'd already had 2 healthy children. I was, do we risk another one? And then to be told that we had a girl as well,
Were you chuffed?
Yeah, I pretended I didn't care, but I did.
Yeah.
So
you had a bit of a moment thinking, gosh, everything's pretty great.
Really good. That Ben's business was doing well.
And he was running his own, he was self-employed running his own flooring business.
Yeah, he was. So he was back and forth to France, but he used to go away for roughly a week a month. And so the rest of the time he was home. So we spent a lot of time together, and something that I'm very grateful for now, actually.
Pros and cons to spending that much time together at
yeah,
home,
and also I think for the children, because he was so prevalent in their lives, the loss was felt so much more acutely. I'm thinking, dads who perhaps don't get home from work until after the children are in bed. And so I think it's a mixed blessing, but in hindsight, I'm very grateful for it. So Tabitha was born in September, and it was in the March when Ben died. Now, Ben was a scuba diver. It was his passion, his hobby. We actually learned on honeymoon. So I'm a qualified diver as well.
Where did you go on your honeymoon?
Sharm,
Egypt.
yes. And Ben, I used to think he was crackers. He would go and dive off the Kent coast in March. Who does that, right?
Cold.
Really cold. He was very qualified. His sort of nickname was Mr. Health and Safety. He took it very seriously, and he just loved it. And Ben was a man that gave everything to his family. So for me, him having that outlet to do something that he loved was really important. And it would be there early March, and he said, this dive's coming up. Do you mind if I go? Will you be all right, baby? And I said, yeah, go. It's fine. I'll be absolutely fine. And so 12th of March rolled round, and he was up early and off on his dive trip. And I can still remember in the kitchen saying to him, just be safe, darling. Not really any meaning behind it. It was just something I would say to him. And so...
And he was going on his own for a dive?
He was going with an organised dive.
Yep.
Yeah, with other divers, and they were going on a wreck dive.
Okay.
So...
Does that mean looking at a...
Yeah, a wreck.
Vessel.
Yeah.
Wreck,
so there's not much to see in the channel. So what the divers will tend to do is they will go and look at, war wrecks. The day kind of just happened as days do when you've got 3 children. The boys were in school. My daughter was, 6 months old. So I don't actually remember what I did. There probably would have been some sort of baby group activity. I do remember I had started my diet that day. So I was feeling a little bit tetchy anyway.
Yeah.
And the day kind of goes on, and it gets to bedtime, bath time, and I've got the kids in the bath, and I'm thinking to myself, where is he? And I'm not in any way scared or nervous or worried. I'm mildly irritated.
Yep.
Because bloody hell, you leave me here to put the kids to bed. Then it gets dark. And by this point, I am thinking, God, this is a little bit off.
And you haven't heard from him on message kind of all day?
No, and I had messaged him. But again, if he was diving, he wouldn't have had his phone on him. He might have left it in the van and not taken it on the boat. He might have gone out for something to eat afterwards. There was a myriad of reasons of why we wouldn't have been in touch. And we didn't, we were very close, but we weren't the kind of couple that text all day. So again, there was nothing really unusual. And I got the boys out the bath. They're in their pajamas, and I've got my daughter in my arms in a little baby grow, looking all gorgeous and cute. And the front door goes, and I think, he's got his keys. Stomped down, ready to give him a piece of my mind. And I have a dog, and this dog is yapping away at the door. So I put her into the living room, and in the time it took me to do this and come back to the door, I've registered that it's uniformed police officers at my door. And I think that is the point in my life where everything changed, because and I know that they're very rarely there with good news. So I opened the door, and these two very, very young officers said to me, "Are you Rosie Moss, wife of Ben Moss?" At which point I felt the colour drain from my face. My body knew before I knew, if you like. And I said, "What's happened? Where is he?" And they said, "Can we come in? What's happened?" And anyway, they came in and they said, "We're terribly sorry, but Ben didn't resurface after the dive today." And I'm thinking, but that was this morning. Why? It's 7:30 at night. Why? And you're wrong. It can't be him. All this kind of bargaining that happens in grief. Then it began to feel like an out-of-body experience. I felt like I was watching myself, and I started to kind of question myself. Am I behaving correctly? Is this what I should do? And also at this point, nobody's able to tell me that he's dead. They're just saying that he's missing. He's not resurfaced. And it became a bit of a carnival. There was police liaison there. The Coast Guard were in touch. A friend was dispatched over to come and sit with me because my parents were in South America. So, and it was a Coast Guard actually that was very, very frank with me. Because by this point they've called off the search. They've said, "We can't search anymore. It's too dark out there." And I said to him, "Do you think he's going to make it? Do you think he's alive?" And he said to me, "Do you want to know?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he was the one that said to me, "It's a recovery mission, not a rescue mission." And those words cemented my fate, really. And knowing what I know, it was freezing. We just had that beast from the east come in. Nobody could have survived those conditions. And of course, I wanted to think that a fishing boat had picked him up, or that he had concussion and was, wandering around France somewhere. But that sort of hope is quite dangerous. And so I had to very quickly make peace, insofar as you can, with the fact that he'd gone.
What time was this? Because did the police officers come around about 7 or 8 p.m?
7:30, yeah.
Okay. And then what? And then they were doing a search.
Yeah, they had the helicopters out. They had RNLI were out.
Yeah.
They put a lot of effort into this search, but ultimately it became a recovery mission. And I will say now, the RNLI were incredible. They did all their training missions for probably a couple of months afterwards around that area in the hope that they might find something. And I then began to Google, how do I tell my children this has happened? And of course, there's nothing out there for my scenario, but it became very clear very quickly that the language I used was going to be important. And to say to young children, they were 7, 5 and 6 months, if I were to say to them, "Daddy's missing, Daddy's lost," that would not have given them the clarity, and they would have held on to that for a long time. So ultimately, 6 o'clock the next morning, I said the words that no parent ever wants to say, "I'm so sorry, my darlings, but Daddy has died." And the noise that came out of those boys, I wished it didn't. I wish I couldn't still hear it.
Thank you so much for sharing.
That's okay.
I know you obviously speak about this quite a lot, but it can't ever feel.
And sometimes you repeat it and you think, "Oh my goodness, that was me."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your life completely changed from the 12th of March, 7:30 p.m. And the next morning you're telling your children they don't have a dad anymore. But you don't have a body.
No.
You don't have complete closure, I suppose, yourself. Did you almost have to... you had to make a decision, and your parents weren't around either. They're on the other side of the world.
No.
And you've got 3 children, and you had to actually be like, no, he is gone. You had to make that decision almost.
And I think that's something that I really felt at the time, because normally a medical professional will deliver that news, or police officer, somebody qualified to do this will make the call that somebody has died. And I had to be this kind of harbinger of doom. I had to ring his mum, his siblings. I felt like I was bringing this devastation, the deliverance of this devastation to everybody. And I felt guilty, wrongly, because it wasn't my fault. But as a mother, particularly with the children, your job, your only job really, is to protect those kids. And I felt that I hadn't done that as a mum, and that my children would be kind of destroyed or damaged permanently. And I think that was my overarching fear. Was, we know that Disney films use the death of a parent to kind of signify the worst adversary that a child can go through. And this was happening to my children, and I was completely powerless to protect them. And that was very, very humbling and very, very scary.
I'm really grateful that you are doing the work you're doing. We're going to talk more about that soon, but we're just going to take a little break before we go into talking about all the admin around losing someone, as if it's not bad enough to lose the love of your life. It's everything else you have to deal with it. So after the break, I'm going to be talking to you all about that. So Rosie, you are going through the unthinkable. Who did you have around you at this time? Who supported you?
So my parents are incredible. I'm very lucky to have both of my parents, and they're both fit and well. And at the time, they were on this kind of adventure holiday in Cuba. So my poor parents got called by the consulate to say they needed to come home, and they dropped everything. They got the first flight they could home, and my dad went back to their house and locked up, and my mum came straight to me. And I had this vision in my head of the taxi coming around the corner where I lived, and I just ran out into the street barefoot and just into my mum's arms. And I don't think I realised how much I needed my mum until she got there. And they just said, we will take care of you. And it meant that the children who wanted to take care of me, and one very well-meaning guest said to my eldest, "You're the man of the house now, Monty." And whilst there was no ill intent there, what it did is it made him feel that he couldn't show vulnerability. He needed to protect me. And my parents would say to the children, "Mum is looking after you. We are looking after Mum." And they actually moved in with me. They lived with me for 3 months, and then they rented somewhere around the corner for another 9 months. So they spent a year living, really close to me. And hand on my heart, I don't know how I would have survived without them. When something like this happens, you have an expectation perhaps of how people might support you. And actually, often it's the people you don't expect. And friendships do very much, they ebb and flow, and they change a lot in grief. And people really, really kind of are there very much in the early stages. At one point, my son even said, "Why are so many people in the house? Why does it feel like a party? Dad's died." And because people bring gifts and,
and giving you a lot of attention and caring for you.
Yes.
But then does it just drop?
Yeah, unfortunately it does. And it's not just my experience. It seems to be a fairly universal experience that, particularly once the funeral or the memorial has happened, a lot of the support does wane. And what you're left with then is you're kind of surveying the wreckage of your life, because everything has gone. Ben was the main earner, so no financial provision because his money, he no money coming in. Even just, doing the school run every day yourself and trying to pay the bills, it just feels incredibly scary. It's like kind of liken it to being dropped into a country where you don't speak the language and you've got no guidebook and you're expected to sort of navigate your way through.
I heard you in an interview, it might have been very early on in your podcast, that you'd actually said in the playground to some friends on the day that he died, but before you obviously knew anything was wrong, that if Ben dropped down dead tomorrow, you wouldn't have a clue how to pay the bills or what to do with any of the finances. And this was, as you know, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And he was probably dead at the time, which I just think is the weirdest thing.
So what did you do with the finances and everything else?
Well,
death admin is
or sadmin, as we call it in the club. It's So it's complicated anyway. It's very, very complicated. There's an enormous amount of admin. When there's no body, it becomes even more complicated. So things like car payments, for example, we had a car on finance. Well, they wouldn't take the car back without the owners say so, but the payments needed to be made. And if they weren't made, there would be, essentially it would lead to bailiffs coming to the house. So I didn't have the money to pay these car payments. So thankfully, my parents stepped into the breach again, and they made a lot of phone calls. They sent a lot of emails and letters, and they managed to secure me things like a mortgage holiday. They managed to get the car company to agree that if I were to sell it, they would just take that and consider it a settlement. But I was supported by my parents. A lot of people wouldn't even know that you could do this or have the wherewithal to do it. I couldn't have done it at that point.
You weren't in a state to do it.
No.
What if people don't have parents there to navigate this stuff?
Honestly, it's a very, very scary and daunting process. And there's even things like there is very little financial support for the widows. You are eligible for something called a bereavement support payment, which is a lump sum and then £100 and something a month. It's very much not life-changing money. And this is made up from your late partner's national insurance contributions. So it's a contributory benefit. But you have to apply for this within 3 months. Otherwise, you can't apply.
So anyone could get this technically if you're widowed.
Yeah.
And you have to apply almost to the government for within 3 months.
Within 3 months.
But you're not going to be in a great headspace. And you hopefully you don't really even know this exists because this hasn't happened. Yeah.
And nobody tells you either. This is the other thing. There isn't like a widow pack that tells you the things you're entitled to and support that you might be able to get. So a lot of people actually go without knowing this exists and miss a deadline.
Oh my goodness, this is heartbreaking. Couple of questions here. So Ben, as you said, was the main breadwinner. He was self-employed, ran the business. What did you do financially? Did he have any insurance in place that helped you?
We weren't paperwork, filing type people. There was a drawer where everything went in. So me and my mum went through this drawer and we managed to find that Ben had got life insurance. So that, immediately that's a massive relief. But of course, there were some complications because his bank account was frozen. The premiums had been stopped. So it had been invalidated. Yeah.
And his bank was frozen because
he was missing. So the insurance company, as it happens, they did agree to pay out once the presumption of death certificate was issued. But then I was thinking, well, did he take out cover for dangerous sports? Because you often have to tick a special box for this.
And it's often can be more expensive. And so maybe you don't always do that.
And you'll be thinking, what are the chances of me dying doing that, right? So I felt very, very precarious. And at a time when all I wanted to do was grieve my husband, I had to be thinking about money. And it made me feel quite mercenary and grabby. And I didn't want to be that person. And initially, his brother gave me some money to live on and my parents helped me. And ultimately, I did end up running his business. So a wood flooring business based in France where I know nothing about wood flooring and I don't speak French. So it was his brothers that kind of stepped up and helped me a lot. So I just became this kind of jack of all trades, really. I would just try anything. And what it did do is it gave me... I was able to be at every school run. I was able to be there for tea time, bedtime every night. Whereas to go back into working up in London, the children would have lost me as well. And they needed me there.
So the insurance did in the end pay out.
Yes.
And were you getting monthly payments from that, or was it
a
lump sum?
It was a lump sum payment. And I'll tell you, when it landed, I went to the bank to explain to them what had happened. And I just said, this lump sum's coming in. You had to go in person, and the bank manager I spoke to, she said, "Oh, lucky you." And again, these are things that you're kind of sideswiped by. Yeah.
What did you say?
I said, "Well, my husband died, so not that lucky."
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, but what that did, that life insurance payout, it wasn't, again, there's a real misconception that you're going to be sitting on your pile of money like Scrooge McDuck. You're not. It's a dated reference.
Sorry, I enjoyed it. And you've got to find the humour in these. And I know you're quite...
Yes, dark humour is very much what got me through. And actually what the insurance was, it didn't quite clear the balance of our mortgage. But what it did do is it enabled me to clear the bulk of my mortgage and to keep my home. So because to have to move home at a time like that would have just been so terrifying.
It was some security in a time of complete turbulence in the rest of your life, wasn't it?
And if you've got a roof over your head, you can kind of make everything else work. That was my mentality. If I can keep a roof over our heads, I'll manage.
I know there was a very big legal battle you had to go through to actually prove that almost Ben was dead, because you didn't have a body, therefore you didn't have a death certificate, therefore you had to go through a huge rigmarole to get him to get several things to prove he was dead. Has there ever been a body recovered?
No, there hasn't. And I think in the early days, I very much wanted there to be. And there was a body found in the sea quite soon after. And it wasn't Ben, obviously. But I realised, I wanted him back. I wanted things. I wanted his wedding ring.
Oh,
and I wanted to be able to give him a proper funeral and give him what he deserved. But as time has gone on, I don't want him to be found. I feel like he's in the second place he was happiest, in the sea. And had he died in a more kind of conventional way, I probably would have scattered his ashes in the sea. And, without being graphic, I don't want to know what happened to him. I make peace with the thought that he's out there somewhere. And wherever we go in the world, I feel like if we're close to the ocean, there's an element of being close to him.
That's beautiful, Rosie. And thank you for talking about this so openly and honestly and with so much care. In the immediate time after his passing, it was a blur, I imagine. What were your coping mechanisms?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Jess. I leant very heavily on alcohol. It's something that I felt a lot of shame around. I don't anymore. I've given myself a lot of forgiveness, because when you are going through something like this, you will turn to whatever you've used to cope with any sort of trauma in the past. And for most people, that's booze.
100%. It's
something
so
bad
prevalent.
happens, you have a drink. And being on my own, particularly after my parents moved out, I spent a lot of time literally on my own. And I used to really struggle with being with my own thoughts. And I lost the ability to read, watch television, to do anything that might have been a sort of healthier distraction. And I found solace in the bottle. And my drinking went from being, I'd always been a bit of a party girl, perhaps a little bit of problematic drinking, but it became really problematic. And I hid it all behind this, I guess, this kind of veneer of middle-class, respectable mum.
Were you drinking like bottles of wine per night?
Primarily, yeah. I'd be, 2 or 3 bottles, and then hiding them, even in the school recycling bin, I'd put them in there so my mum didn't know. So, and these are all the big telltales for drinking, when you're lying about how much you're drinking, you're hiding it. And I felt really, really awful all the time. But that somehow was easier to bear than having to face the emotional pain.
You were numbing yourself.
Absolutely, yeah.
How did that change?
I woke up after my daughter's birthday one year, and I realised I didn't remember the party. And I was the kind of drunk where I thought I could get away with it, whether I could or not, but I was able to function. I was never an angry drunk. And I would still get up the next day and do what needed to be done. But this felt really kind of symbolic to me. You can't remember your daughter's birthday. Do you not owe your children this? And I started therapy. And it took me probably about 6 months of therapy to say about my drinking, because of the shame, because I was scared they would take my children away.
Oh.
That was, I think, the real core fear.
Yeah.
And she gave me the space and the time to open up about why I drank so much. It had been a problem, I realised, for much longer than I'd acknowledged. And essentially, I woke up the morning after my 41st birthday and I thought, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And to this day, I've not picked up another drink. It'll be 4 years next month.
Oh, Rosie, that's incredible.
It's the best thing I've ever done for myself.
Is it?
It really is. Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah.
And sometimes it still is tough.
Yeah.
But I'm not plagued by enormous cravings. I've learnt how to face things. But the thing I wasn't prepared for was I had to grieve again. because
You
when
had to
you're
grieve
numbing
again.
when you're numbing it, you're not really grieving. You on the surface, perhaps, and to a certain level, but I had to go back in again, and I found that very scary and very frustrating because I'm 4 years in. I don't
Yeah,
want
I
to
was going to
be
say,
going
was it
through all
four?
this.
So it was 4 years
Yes,
in,
yeah,
and was that only when you started therapy? Then about
yes,
3.5 years in,
yeah. I tried it early on,
you have to
and
find the right therapist,
you
right?
do. Well, do you know what this therapist said to me? She said to me on our second session, she said, "Oh, I did Google you. You used to be ever so glamorous."
This isn't the therapist you're still with,
No,
is it?
no. I never
God,
went
no.
back. Never went back. And it was so jarring and completely inappropriate as well. So it took me a long time. I then thought, no, therapy's not for me. It's not going to be for me. And it very much is for me. I've been seeing my therapist for 4 years, and it is something that, even though some months I think, God, can I really afford to keep doing this? It's so important because of what I do for work as well, and to enable me to be able to cope with life. Because it's nearly 8 years since Ben died, but sometimes that grief feels just as raw and fresh as it ever has.
Rosie, knowing everything you do now, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Gosh.
Sorry, it's quite a big question.
Yeah, that is a big question. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd love to say that I would go back and I would have faced things, sober, and I would have had the therapy, but I wasn't capable.
No.
I wasn't capable. And one of the things my therapist did say to me is the alcohol, in a way, will have protected me. It will have
Yes.
enabled me to keep living, really.
And to be there for your children in a certain way, right? You were functioning.
Yeah, I was. And I think the term is functioning alcoholic, and that's what I was. And I know now that my children don't actually remember me drinking, which is something I'm quite proud of, but I do talk to them about it.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that it should be taboo and secret. This is something that I battle with. Perhaps there's a hereditary predisposition. They need to be aware of it. So would I do anything differently? Little things, but I think on the whole, I did the best I could with what I had. And there was never, ever a shortage of love and affection, and actually quite a lot of joy. I made a promise to Ben that I would bring joy back into these children's lives. And I did my best. And I think in the circumstances I was faced with, that was the best I could ever have done.
Mm. You say you made a promise to him. Do you still speak to him?
Yeah, I still text him.
Do you?
Yeah. Tend to text him in times of turbulence, times when I feel like I've got nowhere to turn, then I will text him. There's a really sad thing that WhatsApp kicks them out after a while. Yeah, so you can have them in a group chat and suddenly it'll pop up and Ben has left the chat. I know.
Is that just a period of inactivity?
Yeah, I know. So all these little side swipes that you don't expect.
That will never stop coming,
No.
I suppose, in a way. But with things like therapy and, changing your relationship with alcohol, it all helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think we talk about acceptance in grief. And when I first, started reading grief books, the 5 stages of grief, right? Everybody's familiar with these. And the last one is acceptance. And I thought, right, okay, I've got a plan. I've got to rattle through these stages, get to acceptance and tick. And of course, it doesn't work like that. For me, acceptance came very quickly because I had to accept that my husband was dead without any evidence of the fact. So it becomes this acceptance for me is about accepting the fact that you're going to be sad forever. And that's a really kind of hard thing to make peace with. You're going to be sad forever. That sounds really harsh. But sadness doesn't exist in isolation. You can be happy and sad. And it's sort of about making peace with that new version of yourself. I think once you get to the point where you can do this, that's when the real healing begins.
Rosie, this is incredible. And you haven't only been doing healing for yourself, you've also helped many others. We're going to take a short break before we talk all about Widowed AF and everything you've been doing to help so many people. So
Fantastic.
Thank you. Rosie, you've kind of alluded to how helpful Ben's life insurance payout has been. What if you hadn't have had it?
Gosh, I mean, It's quite scary to think about, to be honest, because I almost certainly would have lost my house. I was on maternity leave from a swimming teaching job that I'd taken on, just to have something to do around the kids. So I certainly didn't have, even if I'd gone back, I wouldn't have been able to earn enough to pay the mortgage. I guess my parents might have sold their house to help me, but what an enormous sacrifice that would have been for them. So, and I do know people, I genuinely know people who've lost their homes because even if they're not the main earner, most families now need two earners. And if one goes, things become completely untenable. So yeah, things would have been really, really bleak for me.
And you said earlier that you both weren't exactly like admin-y people.
No, the drawer of doom.
The drawer of doom. So you weren't necessarily one of these couples who were on top of all of their admin and paperwork. But luckily Ben did have life insurance. So what would you say to anyone who, I think there's a misconception sometimes that you only need life insurance if you own a house.
Yeah.
That's not really what do you say to kind of friends now who haven't got it?
Yeah, I think life insurance is such a funny one because we all feel like we're invincible. Nobody wants to be faced with their mortality in their 20s, 30s. And you're right, often when you buy a house, it's kind of forced upon you as part of the process. But I would say to people, when it is possible, because it's not always for everybody, we know this, but when it is possible and it's viable, to take some sort of life insurance out, even if it only is going to pay your rent for 6 months or a year, or it's going to pay your mortgage off, something that will guarantee you that some degree of financial safety at a time when you feel so completely unsafe in every other area of your life. And it does feel gratuitous to think about money when you're grieving. But this, by having that safety net, that breathing space, to be able to grieve the person that you've lost without having to think, how am I going to feed myself, my children? How am I going to keep the house?
And I think it's one of those things that you hope you never have to use it, you or your partner. And also the payments can be pretty low. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't necessarily notice it coming out, depending on, obviously everyone's situation. But you can get it for a really affordable rate, yet it could have a monumental impact.
Yeah, it really could. And I think whilst it is difficult to think about these things and it is a bit scary and it feels a bit morbid, for a relatively small monthly payment, you could be giving your family, your spouse, your children the security that they might really need. And I guess I'm a kind of shining example that it happens to anybody. We all think that we're going to die in our sleep of old age, and my goodness, wouldn't that be wonderful? But and a statistic I quote quite a lot really is, if you are in a romantic relationship, the chances are one of you is going to be widowed. Because again, we don't die holding hands in bed at 98 like we would like to. So it's not this spectre of doom. It's not this thing that might never happen. It probably will happen at some point to you or the person that you love.
Sometimes from the darkest points can come some really beautiful things. Mm-hmm. And Widowed AF is one of those, Rosie.
Thank you.
It is incredible. I would like you to explain what it is and actually how it started, because it's evolved.
Yeah.
So take us back to at what point it started.
It was January 2023 when it actually started. So towards the end of 2022, I started to kind of percolate this idea of doing a podcast, of giving the widow community an opportunity to tell their stories. I had this kind of tagline of, every widow has a story, because in my own life, I was meeting these incredible women and men who'd lost somebody and had kind of, lived to tell the tale, if you like. And I felt that there was a real scope for people to hear the stories, because the wider community needed to know what it was like, but also to give these people the opportunity to have a voice, because widows are a section of society that don't have much of a voice. And so, I put out this advert on Widowed and Young, which is a UK charity, asking for people that might want to come on and share their stories. And I thought I might get 2 or 3, and I was inundated.
Really?
Yeah, people really wanted to tell their stories. So I started, interviewing other people, and it has evolved quite a lot. My co-host left, so then I had to decide whether to carry on as a solo host, which felt quite daunting, having done it with a friend. And I'll be honest with you, there have been times, particularly early on, where 10 minutes before recording, I would be under the desk, because I then graduated to a desk in my outbuilding. And I would be shaking, physically shaking with fear, with anxiety, and I think with the kind of weight of responsibility of what I was doing, because I always wanted to make sure that I treated people with this real kindness and compassion, and I wanted to do it justice. But over time, confidence grew and technology changed, and we started using cameras, and it just continued to grow. And before I knew it, we were hitting sort of 100,000 downloads, and people from America were hearing about it, and it became global. And it is almost entirely because of the people that come on the show. You know, I'm a facilitator. I always say to people, this is your story. I'm here to help you tell it. I'm not here to catch you out. This is not an interview in that sense. And it gives people the opportunity to, much like you did with me, you know, to ask me about who my person was, you know, not just to focus in on the tragedy, because then who doesn't want to talk about the person they love the most in the world, right? And it just began to change people. And I was receiving messages from people saying, and this is such an enormous statement, that it had saved them, because they'd felt like what they were existing through, it wasn't just them. They weren't going mad. They weren't the only people in the world who were feeling these very conflicting, very strange emotions, because grief isn't just sadness, you know, there's a lot of other stuff going on.
I mean, it's amazing. I've listened to several episodes.
And not a widow, see? I thought it would only be widows that listen. But actually, I reckon a good 50% of my listeners are not widowed.
You said it earlier in our conversation that you didn't know what to do or where to go or who to speak to when you had lost Ben. And you needed a space. And I know you joined a community in America, didn't you? And then
the Hot Young Widows Club. Hot Young Widows.
Also, I think there's a big thing about being young and widowed, right? I mean, everyone's grief is valid at whatever point it happens, but there was something so acute about you not really feeling that you could talk to any of your friends, etc.
I didn't know anybody like me. I didn't know anybody. My mum had some friends who were widowed, but they were at very different points in their lives. I'm not diminishing the tragedy of losing somebody later, but it is a different experience. And I would go to parents' evenings, school plays, and I'd always be the only one. And I just thought, this is so lonely. And one of the only, and it really is one of the only positives of widowhood has been the people I've met. And it's those shared war stories. You know, they used to be shared over a bottle of wine and they migrated to a cup of tea. But these stories, this sharing, and there's something about spoken word as well, you know, hearing it from them themselves. It's something that I am incredibly proud of. And I guess like a child to me, you know, I'm very protective of it.
Well, you should be. You should be so proud of it. And Rosie, you said over time it's grown and you've got a desk and you know, and the production, etc. But it hasn't been that long.
No,
it's been about 3 years.
Yeah, it's three years now that it's been running,
which is hardly anything really. And you did it at a point where I think you'd lost Ben for almost 5 years. And was it at that point that you felt ready and able to do it? And were you doing it for you? Were you doing it for others? Were you doing it for both?
I think probably both. I don't think I anticipated it being as cathartic and healing for me as it has been. But it really has. It's actually, you know, I talked about having to go back in and kind of re-grieve. And whilst I was doing this, I was also doing the podcast. So it gave me space to access, you know, I learn from people. You know, I'll be talking to people and I'll be like, oh my goodness, that happened to me as well. So I feel less alone as a result of it.
That's incredible. And we said that it's grown, and I'm so excited about this for you. We need to just talk about the podcast awards, because the British Podcast Awards are like a big deal.
That's the BAFTAs of podcasting.
Yeah, it's a really big deal. And now you entered yourself, because I don't think people realise that you actually have to enter yourself.
You do, and I don't have a team either. That's the thing I think people don't realise, is it is just me.
Yeah.
I outsourced to an editor, but it is just me. So no, there was nobody filling in the forms for me. And I have to say, you know, anything like this, the forms are quite laborious in themselves.
Yeah, they're long-winded. And you set this up to begin with. You didn't set this up to make money.
No.
You didn't set this up to be your job as such. You set this up because you felt like you needed to do it for the widow community. And so you filled in the form, and I think, had you applied before?
Yeah, I'd applied 2 years prior, and not heard anything back. So this was the third year of applying, and I'll be honest, I was thinking, you know, what's the point? But at the back of my mind, in no way did I expect to be shortlisted and certainly not to win anything. But I thought some industry professional might just listen to it because you have to send in a compilation.
Yeah.
So I thought, if it takes one person that listens to this and thinks, oh, this is interesting, it might lead to some opportunities down the line.
Yeah. And why not? It's just a few hours of your time to kind of put all this together, like send it off. And then you got shortlisted. And not only did you get shortlisted, you won the gold award in the interview category. And you were up against like Emily Maitlis of the
big hero of mine.
Yeah, of the news agents, right? That was up for an award. Louis Theroux. There were several other brilliant
Daily Mail was up there.
Daily Mail podcasts, all with funding, all with celebrities or well-known broadcasters. But you took away the win. I just think that is absolutely exceptional, and it gives hope to anyone out there that you can do it. And you were brilliant at what you do, Rosie.
Thank you so much. It was a very surreal experience. I mean, when I got the email to say I'd been shortlisted, I rang my parents, of course, and I'm almost incoherent with crying. And I have to, because obviously I have to caveat this now. So it's good crying. I've been shortlisted. Oh my goodness, and for my parents who don't really, they're both broadcasters by trade, but they don't really understand podcasting. It's kind of come about since they retired. And I think it kind of validated me in a way to the wider community who perhaps aren't widows or don't really understand podcasting. And they came with me to the awards. So it was my mum, my dad and my best friend. And what was really stark actually was how when people did win and went up on the stage, an entourage often would go. And I was thinking to myself, gosh, imagine if I won, I'd have to go up on my own. But of course, that's not going to happen. And then when it came to our category, we were all on tenterhooks. And, third place, well, I can't remember the order they were in, but the third place was one pocket. Then it was the news agents and Louis Theroux. My friend happened to be filming me, and you can sort of see my show. Well, I'm not going to get first. So it's, nice to be included.
You may be hoping for bronze or something,
I thought
right?
I might, I would have been so delighted with bronze. I was happy to just be involved.
Yes.
And when they read out my podcast, I squealed and leapt out of my seat. And beautifully, my friend was still recording. And she said afterwards, I don't know why I was recording. We'd accepted you hadn't won. And then as I walked up onto the stage, everybody was sort of looking to see who this person was because it wasn't a recognisable name. And the goodwill in that room, when they realised that it was just me and, what the subject of the podcast was. And even the photographer kind of gave me a little wink and said, well done. And Maisie Adams and Nick Grimshaw gave me massive hugs. It was the most incredible and surreal experience of my life. It really was.
I bet.
I can see the grin on my face, right?
Well, you deserve it. But it's not just the podcast. It's really a community, a support network of people, of men and women. I know we've spoken a lot about women, but it's men as well.
Yeah, it is. And members of the trans community as well. Yeah.
And you've recorded over 178 episodes now, I think. But you've held a retreat recently.
Soul Sisters.
Yeah, which I thought sounded beautiful. And it was a way you can reach obviously a lot more people via doing things like this, like online, but there's nothing like true
something about
in-person
face
connection.
to face. When you get a group of widows in a room together, some magic happens.
Yeah.
And it really was a magical weekend. And I expected to be a little bit more on the periphery of it. I cooked and, changing beds and all that sort of stuff. But actually what happened was I felt as held and supported by these other women who came into my home to share their grief with me. And there's a WhatsApp group. We've stayed friends. I've had people come to stay with me since that came to the retreat, and I absolutely want to do more. It was really special.
And the next thing I want to talk about is something that you wish you had had when you first lost Ben, when you were first widowed. And that is your new book.
It is,
and
yes.
I am so thrilled. What's it called?
I have got a copy here, and it's called... I can't say what it's called. It's called Widowed AF, a guidebook for grieving your partner. So it's not an enormous tome. It's an accessible book, and it goes through the 5 stages of grief. But I also talk about things like the admin, about how to parent children who are grieving, about things like widow's fire, which is something that's quite taboo. That's an increase in sexual desire. I know,
which
right?
You're not supposed to have.
Not
maybe?
prepared for that, I can tell you.
we could need another podcast to discuss
We do,
Widow's
we do,
Fire. But for anyone who can't see us right now, it's a beautiful, very on brand, pretty cover, to be honest. It's pink. And is it for someone in a very dark place who just doesn't know where to start, or actually doesn't have all the info? You had very helpful parents on a lot of these things. Someone might not have that, and you've included checklists, you've included little guides, and just to make a horrendous process and time a little bit better.
I think, if I'm honest with you, I felt, obviously there was always been a desire to write this book. It kind of percolated for a long time. But I realised that what I had was thousands of hours of transcripts from this podcast. And to my knowledge, nobody's ever done a body of research into the experience of being widowed on this scale. And whilst I can't claim, that it's scientific research, it kind of is. So I wanted to use these stories and create a kind of collaborative book, because I could have told my story. It could be a full memoir, but actually what it is, it's woven with other people's stories. So the idea is that however your partner died, whatever stage of grief you're at, whether you're angry and you hate the world, or whether you're in a deep, dark depression, you can flick to the chapter in the book and you can read how other people have dealt with it. And then you've got some kind of key points, and then there's helplines and things at the back. I just feel like there's a lot of books around grief that are just one person's story, and they're incredibly valid and powerful. But I couldn't find one that had all the kind of compilation of lots of stories together.
Well, I'm certain that it's going to help a lot of people. And
Thank you. I hope so. I do hope so.
I'm so pleased for you. We're going to take a quick break now. And when we're back, I would like to talk to you all about what you've learned from your experiences and how you were able to move forward, not on, but forward, and your advice and help to other people.
Absolutely.
Rosie, losing Ben so suddenly as you did, obviously it was a ridiculous shock. What would you say to people who think it won't happen to me?
Gosh, I mean, wouldn't we all like to think it won't happen to us? But unfortunately, I know from the work that I do and from my personal experience that it does happen. It happens every day, and it happens in terrible, surprising and shocking ways. I speak to a lot of people who've lost partners to terminal cancer. That is, unfortunately, the primary cause, but also lots and lots of sudden death, Really sadly, I do speak to a lot of people who've lost partners to suicide. That's a real sign of the way the world is at the moment, which, it's really sad.
And just more and more reason that we need to see people in person and reach out to people and check in, isn't it?
And talk about these uncomfortable things, And actually, I think, the widow community, we're kind of at risk as well, because if people aren't talking about the less palatable aspects of grief, then what you do is you internalize a lot of that shame. And we know that shame can't live in the light, right? As soon as you shine a light on it.
And death does need to be spoken about
it
more.
Does. It's one of the only two inevitabilities, right?
Yeah. And here's a question for you, Rosie. We've spoken a lot about the direct, if you're the one to lose your partner. What about if your friend, your sister, your daughter, your mum is going through that direct grief and become a widow? What do they do? Because I think there's a lot of things that people do which they shouldn't, or you wish they should.
A lot of people will say to you, let me know if there's anything I can do. Let me know if there's anything you need. I have said this myself, okay? You feel like you don't want to assume. So you say, tell me what you need and I will do it.
But that person's not in a position to tell you, are they?
When somebody told me that a friend of theirs had set up a WhatsApp group for the friends. The grieving person wasn't in the WhatsApp group, but they could message one person and say, for example, I don't know, I need air in my tyres. Oh, I don't know how to do it. My husband used to do it. Somebody would post in the group and say, Rosie needs help with this. Can anybody do it? And then you're taking that onus of responsibility of asking, of publicly asking, because that can make you feel quite infantilized. And, for another example is you have to put your parents as your next of kin on things. You do, a lot of your kind of autonomy gets stripped away. And often people resort to sending flowers or chocolates and things like that. And I again, I don't want to make anybody feel bad if that's what they have done in the past, but flowers aren't brilliant, because do you know what flowers do? Die.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And it's a reminder right there,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is. And lilies.
Oh, okay. Let's not do flowers then.
If you can afford to club together and pay for a cleaner, or you might pop in and do it yourself, send a weekly shop. Or if they've got young children, and bear in mind, not everybody wants to be separated from the children when they're grieving, but for a lot of people, they need some space.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine used to look after my youngest for a couple of hours on a Friday so I could go to the gym. And sometimes I went and sat in the sauna, I won't lie to you, but I had those 2 hours a week where I knew I could go, not be mum, not be the grieving widow, just go and have some time to be me.
Be you, be Rosie. Obviously, Ben's finances and him having insurance really helped you out. Do you have life insurance now?
No. I should do, shouldn't I? I really should. I know. And it's one of those things that even knowing what I know about how much life insurance helped me, I've yet to take it out. And perhaps there's an element of facing my own mortality, which I'm a bit scared of. I did do a will, and that was important because I had to decide who my children would go to if I died. And also, one of the things children will ask is for you to tell them that you're not going to die. Now, you can't do that because it's not true. So what you have to do is be able to tell them what would happen if you did die. And it doesn't have to be in great detail. But for me, I was able to say, if anything were to happen to me, Grandma and Papa would look after you. And then Uncle Joe would look after you. There's people that love you that would take care of you.
So what would you say to people who haven't got any of these things in place?
I would say, and it's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? But I would say certainly look into it. It's not as expensive as you think it's going to be. It's not, you don't have to answer endless questions about your health and your mental health and your medical history. It can be done relatively quickly and put into place probably within a few hours.
Your life's work now is focused on, helping people through this pain. For anyone who might not have heard your story before and might have just lost a partner, what would you say to them?
Firstly, you have my deepest sympathies because what you're going through is one of the most traumatic, life-altering and devastating things that can happen to a human being. I think the only thing worse would probably be the loss of a child. And I would say that you will, it might feel like a false comfort if I say to you that you're going to be okay, and perhaps I can't make that promise, but you will not be as broken as you feel right now. Time is a healer. The love and the loss and the pain, it's never going to disappear, but you will grow a life around it slowly and often painfully. But one day you'll wake up and you'll realise that you haven't been flawed by your grief that day. And actually that can come with some guilt, when you first start to feel human again. But it's granting yourself that compassion and that kindness as you navigate through.
Oh, Rosie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You've spoken so eloquently, and I'm in no doubt that you have helped many, many women and men and will continue to do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Pretty Covered. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you've got a story you'd like to share, we would love to hear from you. Just check out the link in the show notes to get in touch. See you next time. Pretty Covered is a podcast brought to you by Polly, a trading style of Candid Insurance Services Limited, which is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. The content of this podcast is meant to be informational, and it should not be considered as financial advice. Terms and conditions may apply.